When I married Ethan, I wasn't just marrying a man. I was marrying the dream of a family, a big, loud, loving family I had always secretly wished for. Growing up an only child in a silent house, where my parents lived more like roommates than soulmates, I had longed for that kind of warmth. For noisy Sunday dinners. For chaotic Christmas mornings. For traditions that made a house feel like a home. Ethan talked about his family like they were a tribe. Unbreakable. Unconditional. They'll adopt you the second they meet you, he promised, laughing one night as we lay tangled in bed. You'll see. You're going to fit right in. I wanted to believe him. God, I needed to believe him. The first meeting was on a crisp Sunday afternoon. We drove 3 hours to his hometown, a sleepy little place where neighbors waved from front porches and kids played in the street. I wore my nicest dress, baked a homemade pie from my grandmother's recipe, and rehearsed polite responses in my head the entire way there. Ethan's excitement was contagious. He sang along to the radio, drumming his fingers on the steering wheel, throwing me warm glances every few miles. Relax, he said, squeezing my knee. They're going to love you. I smiled, but my palms were damp with nerves. Something inside me whispered that first impressions mattered more than he realized. The house was exactly what I pictured. White siding, a porch swaying gently in the breeze, a rusty bike abandoned by the steps. A woman opened the door before we even knocked. Ethan's mother. She was pretty in a sharp, polished way, not the soft, cookie-baking type I'd imagined. She smiled tightly when she saw me, a glint of something unreadable flashing in her eyes. You must be the wife, she said, not unkindly, but with a coolness that prickled my skin. Not my name. Not a welcome. Just the wife. Inside, the house was full of people, noise, and a strange, invisible tension. Ethan's brothers clapped him on the back, shouting jokes across the room. His father called him over to help fix the TV connection. His cousins crowded around, sharing beers and football stats.
Me?
I stood there holding the pie, smiling awkwardly, waiting for anyone to notice me. A few polite nods. No questions. No real invitations into the conversation. When I tried to jump in, laughing at a story Ethan's brother was telling, offering a detail about a similar experience, the group shifted subtly, closing ranks, as if I had interrupted something sacred, as if my voice didn't belong. At dinner, the divide became impossible to ignore. The table was long and crowded, but somehow I ended up at the far end, wedged between two aunts who spoke over me like I wasn't there. They asked Ethan about work, about his car, about the old neighbors down the street. They never once turned to me. Never once asked how we met, or what I did, or even how the drive was. I pushed the food around my plate, the knot in my stomach tightening with every passing minute. Across the table, Ethan laughed, completely at ease, his hand resting casually on his beer bottle. I caught his eye once, smiled, a small, desperate smile, but he just winked playfully and turned back to his brother's story. And in that moment, something inside me twisted. Because I realized. He didn't see it. He didn't see me. Not the way I needed him to. On the drive home, the silence between us was deafening. I stared out the window, blinking hard against the sting in my eyes. Ethan hummed along to the radio, oblivious. They're a lot, huh? He said finally, chuckling. But they'll warm up. Just give it time. I nodded stiffly, not trusting my voice. Because how could I explain the hollow ache building inside me? The sinking certainty that no matter how hard I tried, I would always be a guest in their world. Never family. Never enough. And worse, that Ethan wouldn't even notice. Or worse still, that he wouldn't care. After that first visit, I told myself things would get better. That first impressions were awkward for everyone. That family bonds took time. That eventually, I would become part of the noise, the stories, the history. But with every new gathering, every holiday, every family event, the walls around them, and between us, only grew higher. Thanksgiving came, a sprawling, noisy dinner at Ethan's parents' house. I wore a dress I thought was appropriate, Modest, warm colors, hair done neatly. I baked a pumpkin pie from scratch, spending hours in our tiny kitchen, determined to impress. As soon as we arrived, Ethan was swept away, his brothers pulling him into the living room to argue about football, his mother leading him into the kitchen to taste the gravy. I stood there in the doorway, pie in my hands, waiting for someone to notice me. No one did. Finally, I cleared my throat and offered the pie to his mother. She glanced at it, smiled politely, and said,
"Oh,
"We already have 3 pumpkin pies, but I'm sure someone will eat it." She took it from me and placed it on the sideboard without another word. I stood there, feeling small and stupid, the heat rising to my cheeks. When I found Ethan later, laughing with his cousins over a beer, I pulled him aside and whispered, "I feel invisible." He frowned, looking around. "They're just used to things being a certain way," he said, brushing a hand through his hair. "Don't take it personally, babe. It's just how they are."
just how they are. As if that made it okay.
As if my loneliness was something trivial, something silly, something I should just get over. Christmas was worse. They exchanged gifts with practiced ease, handing around boxes wrapped in shiny paper, laughing at inside jokes I didn't understand. When I opened my present, a generic candle set, I forced a smile and said thank you, even though it was obvious no one had thought about it. Ethan got a new leather jacket. His brothers, expensive watches. His mother, a pearl necklace. I sat there with my candle, trying not to feel like a charity case. Trying not to notice the way Ethan avoided my eyes. It wasn't just the big gatherings. It was the everyday moments too. The casual brunches where no one saved me a seat. The phone calls Ethan would take in the other room, laughter leaking through the walls, his family's voices loud and familiar, my name never once mentioned. I tried to talk to him, tried to explain how every interaction left me feeling smaller, more isolated, less welcome. "You're being too sensitive," he said once, his voice tinged with irritation. "You have to understand. They're set in their ways. It's not about you."
But it was about me. It was absolutely about me.
Because while they laughed and talked and shared memories, I sat in silence. Because while they planned vacations, reunions, family projects, I was never included. Because every time they brushed me aside, and Ethan said nothing, did nothing, he chose them. Every single time he chose them. One afternoon, after another awkward lunch where I was spoken over, ignored, forgotten, I sat in the car beside him on the drive home, staring out the window at the endless gray highway. "Do you even notice?" I asked quietly, my voice barely above the hum of the tires. "Notice what?" he said, glancing at me in confusion. "The way they treat me," I said. "Like I'm an outsider. Like I'm just there." He sighed heavily, tapping his fingers on the steering wheel. "Babe, you're making this a bigger deal than it is," he said. "They're just reserved. It'll take time." "It's been 2 years," I whispered. He said nothing. And in that silence, I heard everything. When we got home, I went straight to the bedroom and shut the door. I sat on the bed, staring at the floor, feeling the slow, steady unraveling of something I had once believed was unbreakable. It wasn't just about his family anymore. It was about Ethan. About how easy it was for him to dismiss my pain. About how easily he let me sit alone at every family gathering, unnoticed and unclaimed. About how he refused to stand up for me, to even see me. I realized then, with a hollow ache, that I hadn't just married into a family that treated me like a stranger. I had married a man who let them. And maybe that was the loneliest truth of all. After that car ride, something shifted inside me. Not a violent tear, not an explosive confrontation. Just a quiet, irreversible cracking. The kind of breaking that happens so softly you almost don't hear it. Until one day you realize the pieces inside you no longer fit together the same way. I started pulling back, without even realizing it. At family gatherings, I no longer tried to wedge myself into conversations. I no longer laughed too loudly at their jokes or forced smiles when ignored. I no longer baked pies or brought hostess gifts or offered to help in the kitchen. I became polite, distant, Invisible by choice, instead of by accident. Because pretending to belong where you aren't wanted is a different kind of humiliation, one that eats away at your self-worth until you start wondering if maybe you deserve the cold shoulders, the tight smiles, the conversations that die when you enter the room. Ethan noticed, eventually. One evening, after another birthday party where I spent most of the time sitting alone on the couch while his cousins reminisced about college days and inside jokes, he pulled me aside as we were getting ready for bed. "You've been acting weird," he said, frowning. I stared at my reflection in the mirror, removing my earrings with careful, deliberate motions. "Have I?" I said flatly. "Yeah," he said. "You're so withdrawn. It's like you don't even try anymore." The words hit harder than they should have. I turned to face him slowly. "Why should I try?" I asked, my voice low and trembling. "Why am I the only one trying?" Ethan looked genuinely confused. "They're just being themselves," he said helplessly. "You're reading too much into it. They don't hate you." "They don't see me," I said, louder now, the dam inside me beginning to crack. "They don't know me. They don't care to know me. And you," I faltered, pain clogging my throat. "You let them." The words hung there, heavy and raw. Ethan opened his mouth, then closed it again, running a hand through his hair in frustration. "What do you want me to do?" he finally snapped. "Force them to like you." "No," I whispered, the fight draining out of me. "I wanted you to stand by me. I wanted you to notice how small I feel around them. I wanted you to make me feel like I wasn't fighting for a place in your life all by myself." He stared at me, stricken. And for a heartbeat, I saw it. The realization dawning in his eyes, the slow, terrible understanding that love alone wasn't enough to bridge the gap he had allowed to widen between us. We slept back to back that night. No angry words. No slam doors. Just silence. A cold, hollow silence that spoke louder than any argument ever could. After that, things didn't explode. They eroded.
Piece by piece.
Moment by moment. Little silences stretched longer. Little kindnesses grew fewer. Little walls rose higher. We still loved each other, I knew that. But love without defense, without loyalty, without solidarity, it withers. It curdles into something brittle and sad. One Sunday morning, while Ethan slept in, I sat alone at the kitchen table, stirring a cold cup of coffee, staring at the framed photo on the wall. It was a picture of us at our wedding, me beaming in white, him grinning down at me like I was his whole world. I studied the woman in that photo. So bright-eyed, so hopeful. I wondered what she would think if she could see herself now, sitting in a home that didn't feel like hers, loving a man who didn't fight for her, waiting for a family that would never embrace her. In that quiet kitchen, as sunlight streamed in and the world went on outside, I realized something heartbreaking. You can survive being a stranger to his family, but surviving being a stranger to the person you married? That leaves scars you never stop carrying. The distance between Ethan and me had become a living thing, a silent, heavy presence that sat between us at every meal, lingered at the foot of our bed, followed us like a shadow we couldn't shake. We no longer fought. Fighting required energy, passion, belief that things could still change. What we had now was worse. Indifference, resignation, and a quiet grief that neither of us dared name. I started spending more time away from home, long walks after work, lingering at coffee shops, pretending to read, driving aimlessly through streets I barely recognized, just to avoid the suffocating silence of our apartment. Sometimes I wondered if Ethan even noticed. Sometimes I wondered if he was grateful for the space. One evening, after a particularly painful Sunday dinner, another gathering where I was once again treated like a decorative object at the table, something inside me snapped. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was a quiet, tired breaking. The kind that comes after years of bending yourself into smaller and smaller shapes, hoping to fit into places you were never meant to belong. We got home, the night air sharp and cold around us. Ethan tossed his keys into the bowl by the door, shrugged off his jacket, and turned toward the kitchen like it was any other night. I stood in the entryway, staring at him, feeling the weight of all the words I had swallowed pressing against my chest. "Ethan," I said, my voice steady but hollow. He paused, sensing something different. "Yeah." I swallowed hard. "We need to talk." The dreaded words. The ones that change everything. We sat across from each other at the kitchen table, the same table where we used to plan vacations, laugh over burnt pancakes, whisper about dreams we thought were invincible. Now, it felt like a negotiating table between two weary strangers. "I can't keep doing this," I said finally, forcing the words out. He frowned. "Doing what?" "Pretending," I said, my voice breaking. "Pretending that your family's coldness doesn't hurt me. Pretending that your silence doesn't feel like betrayal. Pretending that loving you is enough when I am constantly being made to feel like a stranger in your life." He looked away, his jaw tightening. "They don't hate you," he said defensively, the same tired refrain. "Maybe they don't," I said. "But they don't love me either. And the worst part, Ethan, you don't even fight for me. You never have." Silence. Thick. Crushing. He opened his mouth, then closed it again, like the right words were just out of reach. "I just didn't want to cause problems," he muttered finally. "I was the problem," I said bitterly. "The second I walked into your world, I became the outsider. And instead of standing beside me, you stood by and watched." Tears blurred my vision, but I blinked them away. I needed to be clear. I needed to be strong. "I deserve more," I said, voice shaking but firm. "I deserve to be someone's choice, not someone's burden to explain away." Ethan leaned back in his chair, rubbing his hands over his face, a long, weary sigh escaping him. "What are you saying?" he asked, voice low. I looked at him, really looked at him. At the man I had loved. At the man who had once promised me a future full of warmth and laughter. And realized that man no longer existed. Maybe he never had. Maybe I had loved a version of him that only ever lived in my mind. "I'm saying," I said quietly, "that I can't keep breaking myself into pieces small enough to fit into your life." I stood up, pushing the chair back slowly. "I'm saying I choose me now."
He didn't stop me. He didn't call after me.
He just sat there, staring at his hands, as if realizing too late what he had lost. Or maybe realizing he had never really seen it at all. I packed that night. Not frantically. Not in anger. With a quiet, aching resolve. I took only what I needed: clothes, my favorite books, a framed photo of me as a little girl before the world taught me to beg for belonging. I left behind the wedding album, the anniversary gifts, the dreams that no longer fit. When I closed the door behind me for the last time, I stood in the hallway for a moment, breathing in the unfamiliar quiet. It hurt. God, it hurt. But it also felt like freedom.
Raw. Terrifying.
Necessary. Because sometimes survival isn't about holding on. Sometimes it's about knowing when to let go. The first morning after I left was the hardest. I woke up in the small guest room at my friend's apartment, the thin mattress creaking beneath me, sunlight bleeding weakly through faded curtains. For a moment, I forgot where I was. I reached instinctively across the bed for Ethan, for the warmth, for the comfort of familiarity. But all I touched was cold, empty sheets. Reality crashed over me like a wave, and I lay there staring at the ceiling, wondering if I had made a mistake. Wondering if I should have fought harder. Wondering if maybe being invisible in a family wasn't as bad as being alone. Grief is a strange thing. It doesn't come all at once like the movies show you. It creeps up in the smallest, most unexpected moments. At the grocery store, reaching for his favorite cereal and realizing I didn't need it anymore. Hearing a song on the radio that we once sang together at the top of our lungs, windows down, laughter filling the night. Passing a stranger wearing a jacket just like his, and for one stupid, gut-wrenching second, thinking it was him coming to find me. It hurt. God, it hurt. But somewhere inside all that hurt, something else began to stir. Something small. Something stubborn. Something like freedom. I stopped trying to explain myself. To justify my leaving. to defend my sadness, to make anyone, even myself, understand what it feels like to walk away from the person you thought would be your forever. I started walking more. Long, aimless walks through the city. No destination. No purpose. Just me, and the sound of my own breathing, and the realization that for the first time in a long time, I didn't have to shrink myself to fit into someone else's life. I could build my own. Some days, the sadness was overwhelming. I missed him. I missed the way things used to be, or maybe just the way I imagined they were. But slowly, as the weeks slipped by, the sadness softened. It stopped feeling like a knife twisting in my gut. It started feeling more like a dull ache, a scar, instead of an open wound. Proof that I had survived something. Proof that I could survive more. One afternoon, months later, I sat in a tiny coffee shop, a book in one hand, a cup of tea cooling beside me. I looked around, at the worn wooden tables, at the chipped paint, at the strangers lost in their own worlds, and felt a quiet, surprising peace settle over me. I wasn't waiting for anyone. I wasn't performing for anyone. I wasn't fighting to be seen. I was just there. And that was enough. Ethan never called. I think some part of me had been waiting for it, the grand gesture, the teary apology, the realization that just a quiet sadness for what could have been, if only love had been enough. If only loyalty had been enough. But I also think about the girl who walked away. The girl who finally realized she was worth more than empty seats at crowded tables. More than polite smiles and forced conversations. More than being a ghost in someone else's life. She was worth choosing. And she finally chose herself. As I sipped my tea and turned the page of my book, I smiled softly. Not because everything was perfect. Not because I wasn't still healing. But because, for the first time in a long time, I wasn't waiting for anyone to save me. I had already saved myself.